Welcome back to Following Noah on a Stormlight podcast. This week, we are in our Wind and Truth preview number 8, and we are covering both the interludes 1 and 2 from last week and chapters 14 and 15 from this week. Tim, how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
Doing well. David?
I'm doing great, but I'm very tired because I just had a baby girl, which is why I missed last week.
Woo-hoo.
Congratulations,
Clap,
David.
clap, clap.
Thank you. So, yeah, she's happy and healthy, all fingers and toes. So,
Fabulous. All right, let's roll intro, and then we'll cover the interludes first in Wind and Truth. Alrighty. Interlude 1 and 2 in Wind and Truth. Correct me if I'm wrong, but we hadn't seen either of these chapters before last week. I hadn't seen them in a pre-read or anything like that.
correct. I was actually expecting the interlude that we did get a preview for, and we did not get that. So,
Right.
I wonder when that happens, but we have not seen these two interludes before, definitely.
Okay. So we have a Kalak chapter, which I feel like we can cover fairly briefly. I thought it was going to be a big reveal. It was a medium reveal, I suppose. And then an Odium interlude. Let's cover the Kalak one first, since it comes first. Kalak, when Kalak's point of view, he retreats into his house in lasting integrity. And he has an internal dialogue of, oh, I'm glad I didn't get swept up with those radiants. That was a close call. And then turns out Felt from Shallan's crew, who's been sprinkled around a couple scenes in Stormlight. We knew he was from Scadrial. Turns out he's in the Ghostbloods, which we probably should have guessed. I assume that was a pretty easy guess. He has a dagger there with him, threatening Kalak. And that's pretty much the whole interlude. He's now fallen in with the Ghostbloods. What do you guys think?
I was actually I was actually surprised. I was like, Felt's in the Ghostbloods? Like, it seems obvious in retrospect, but I had never personally considered that.
Yeah, me
for
too.
some reason. I mean, he certainly predates the Ghostbloods formation by a lot. The other thing that I've always had this theory that probably the reason most world hoppers are ageless is they get their hands on enough breath to become ageless. And it seems that at least is how Felt did it. So there must be some kind of black market for breath that, you join the secret societies, you do enough for them, you gain breath, and now you're ageless.
Yeah, I agree. It was pretty surprising for me as well, but like you're saying, I guess it shouldn't have been Feast from Scadrial. Really, the only way we know of that people would get off would be through getting involved with the Ghostbloods or whatever existed before the Ghostbloods were. I thought it was interesting though, getting to see a Sion. I get to play a more devious role. We've never seen that before, but I like how Elantris keeps on showing up in different areas. And then the Ghostbloods, they really seem like there's some infighting there, not a lot of trust, a lot of confusion.
We saw that in Lost Metal as well, that there's kind of schisms in the Ghostbloods. They have a general working order, but they definitely work in what is cells? Would cells be the right way to put it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You put it that way, and it makes me think of terrorists.
Yeah.
That's like kind of what they're doing.
Depending on who you talk to.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Matter of perspective. Interesting.
There is a word of Brandon, or at least some there was something people were talking about on Discord that Felt during Era 1 may have actually been involved in the trade through Bits of Hathsin. So
Oh.
he
Okay.
might be a world hopper much older than we expect.
Okay.
We kind of assume he's from Scadrial, but we just know he was on Scadrial during Era 1. But there could be more to him.
Sure.
Interesting.
I'm curious if he's more tied to cultivation than we're assuming, because he's present in the Dalinar cultivation scenes in Oathbringer. That's where we see him really before now. His actually his only other line of dialogue, really. So I'm wondering if he's more involved in that than is shown, but I don't know. I haven't really given him much thought until obviously now. So,
Mhm.
all right. Second interlude, Odium point of view. I loved this interlude. I really, really liked this because I think ever since I read Mistborn for the first time, I was fascinated by the relationship between Vessel and Shard and really getting to delve into that. I don't know how much we're going to, but any small amount I'm going to really enjoy. So
Mhm.
I was really looking forward to the contents of this interlude. What do you guys think?
I expected you to like it for a different reason, because it really, to me, really mirrors the conversation that Wax has with Harmony at the end of Bands of Morning when he's dead.
Oh, you're right. It
Because
does.
Wax is like, why don't you help people more? And Harmony's like, well, there's these reasons. And it felt like almost the exact same conversation, except in the case of Terravodium, or Todium, he can act on his desires without cultivation. Like, he's not trying to convince cultivation to do it. He's like, nah, I'm just going to do that. Right.
Yeah.
I'm going to remove a certain amount of free will in order to prevent suffering, which is exactly what Wax was suggesting Harmony do. So I thought that was a really interesting parallel. And it seems like probably a common thing that shards kind of have to grapple with. And maybe as they learn from their mistakes, they tend towards the sort of non-intervention or very small, like tiny intervention pokes, rather than like what it seems like Todium wants to do, which is, nope, you're all just, puppets now, you know.
Yeah, it's very curious. And it makes me wonder why Odium, or Race when he was Odium, why he kept on going. But even with that, um, when he got trapped for so long, definitely realized how much he was like exposing himself to being hurt, and learn from that. It's like when you're playing a game for infinity, like it's the small points that count, not winning immediately.
I think it'll be an interesting dynamic even further if Teravangian still has good days and bad days under the influence of cultivation.
Mhm.
Because obviously at the end of this interlude and with the chapters that we got by the end of this episode, Odium and cultivation have struck quite a divisive line. So we could have been seeing quote unquote weak Teravangian, from our previous couple books, where he really feels for the the common person, the common boy, and he's weeping over this boy. And then where there's big brain Teravangian days where he says, I don't kill the choir, I don't care, I just got to get him out of here. So I'm really curious if we're going to have that same influence from cultivation present or not, or if he's got rid of that.
So in my opinion, he's gotten rid of the direct influence from cultivation, just because I don't see how a shard could affect another shard in that way. But I will say, I wonder if he's kind of melded all of that together. So it's not like he's switching between days, but he's just all of the days at once all the time. So like he has that huge empathy, but also that huge intelligence. And he's kind of fighting an internal battle at all times, like between them and trying to find a balance. And so it almost feels like I'm weeping for the death of this child, therefore I should control all people. Right? And it almost feels like both of those things you just said, like, you know, the super empathetic one, but then when he's smart, he's like, kill the choir. Like it almost feels like he's doing both at once in this interlude.
He also has a smarter-ish day with Dalinar, where they talk about the parable of the murderer with the three innocents, etc., etc. And Taravangian comes to the conclusion that you have to kill all four to make sure you get the murderer. Dalinar comes to the conclusion that you have to let go all four because you can't find the murderer. So, yeah, I don't know. There's some really fascinating Taravangian concepts that I'm really happy that we get to explore, even in this book, and maybe moving forward past this book.
I would love to see like an ascended Dalinar having the same conversation with ascended Taravangian, like on a grander scale.
Would you sacrifice Roshar for the greater good of the Cosmere, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah.
I feel like that's going to come back for sure. And I was going to bring that parable up if you hadn't. So.
Yeah, quite likely. Quite likely. I like the chapter title for this one. I often don't pay attention to them, but this one's really good. The Divided God. It makes me think of Sazed, and he's really setting up that duality of there's a lot of similarities between the two, Sazed and Taravangian.
So now that you mention it, before in our group of interludes, the interlude title would be the point of view character name, unless it was the through interlude character, in which case they had titles. So now I'm wondering if we're getting an Odium interlude every day for the whole book.
I actually, I think you're right, because Kalak is just called Kalak,
right?
But this interlude isn't just called Taravangian or Odium, so I do think we're going to get more Taravangian interludes throughout the book,
which I'm very excited for. I didn't think
I think that's a great decision.
I didn't think I was going to be that excited about it, but that's really cool.
So are we gonna, I mean, it sounds like we were right when we were speculating last episode, which was 2 weeks ago, that we would get interludes between every day.
Right. Yeah.
Which is a lot more interludes than we're used to.
Yeah.
But we only got 2 interludes between these 2 days. So it could be the same number of interludes, just more sporadic.
Right. So more Odium interludes then, and less split up interludes.
I do wonder if we'll get an Odium every single interlude section, or if it'll just be like, maybe there'll be 3 or 4 of them.
Sure.
I also think that this interlude, where it kind of reminds us, oh yeah, there's a cultivation, right?
Yeah.
He likes to add those little reminders before, like, then she appears in front of I'm not skipping ahead, but she appears 2 chapters later in front of Dalinar, and then we're like, oh yeah, that's who that is, right? I like how he manages to fit in these little reminders in case you haven't, reread it recently.
Well, in that similar idea, I think Felt was mentioned by name in a previous chapter, like a couple weeks ago, and then he shows up actually with dialogue this week. So,
yeah, there was one last thing I wanted to mention. Odium. It seems like he's going insane in the same way that Zeth is. Zeth hearing the voices, the suffering, all that kind of stuff. And we seem to think Kaladin's going to be doing some stuff to help Zeth. Do you think that he'll do anything that would help Taravangian Odium?
Ooh.
I think Dalinar will. I don't think Kaladin has like any relationship with Taravangian though, so.
Yeah, it's an interesting point though. Like we've been talking about how is Odium the real adversary of this book? Is the Challenge of Champions really the big event at the end of this book?
Right.
And maybe something happens where Taravangian kind of comes around a bit. Like this could be all part of Cultivation's plan, where she knows that Taravangian as a vessel will kind of morph Odium differently than Reyes did. She says something about that, doesn't she, in the chapter?
Yeah, so the entire interlude is Taravangian having internal dialogue of, no, my name's not Odium, it's Taravangian. It takes him a while to actually remember and get back to his old name. Like, it's not till the end of the interlude that the name Taravangian is dropped. Yeah, I don't know. There's some really interesting clash here between Cultivation and Taravangian, because Taravangian, at the end of the chapter, he says, I know there will not be a way to soothe the agony, not until there is but one God. And that's kind of how the interlude ends as Cultivation walks off. So that made me think back to our previous, or our last epilogue with dirty tricks with Hoid and Taravangian. Are Hoid and Todium's goals now like the same? If Hoid's goal is to unite Adonalsium, or bring back unite all the shards, and Todium's is eliminate all the shards except for mine, or maybe absorb them all into me, or however you want to interpret, until there's one God. By the end of this book, could Taravangian and Hoid be on the same team?
I don't think they will be on the same team, but it does seem like they have very similar goals.
I'm going to disagree here, because Taravangian's goal here is the same as what Odium has always wanted. Odium, from the start, immediately went around trying to destroy all the other shards and become the only shard. So if that was aligned with Hoid's goal, then Hoid would be already aligned with Odium, and that is definitely not the case. So I don't think this is anything new. I think this is Odium, the shards, influence on Taravangian, where the Odium shard seems to just want to be the only shard, and almost immediately starts affecting the vessel's goals in that way.
Yeah, it's a good point.
I also think destroying all the other shards is not the same as uniting all of the shards back into Adonalsium. So
yeah, and that's not the argument I was making. But Taravangian specifically says, until there's but one God. And Reyes would interpret that, especially towards the end of his vessel ship, that okay, I have to eliminate everybody else. But Taravangian ends the interlude with, he could save them, all of them. Who is them? I don't know. But I wonder if Taravangian could interpret that differently than Reyes was, and Odium has new goals.
maybe that could be used to eventually convince him to unite with, there's the idea that, the Shard of War might be created with Odium and Honor, or even Odium, Honor, and Cultivation all uniting together. Yeah. Like, it feels pretty echoey of what happened in Mistborn. It's like, do we want Stormlight to end this the same way as Mistborn? But I mean, ultimately, I think the entire Cosmere's goal is eventually to reunite Adonalsium. So you got to do that somehow. And right. So I could definitely see, I think I see what you're saying, or at least my interpretation of what you're saying is maybe he can be convinced that the idea of there being only one God doesn't work as just being Odium and everything else destroyed. Instead, that means reuniting Adonalsium and like changing his mind in that way.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else on the interludes? All right. For what I'm most excited about in this episode, we get epigraphs. And not only do we get epigraphs from the Way of Kings. I am so excited that we get to revisit parables from the Way of Kings. If there is the biggest fan of in-world Way of Kings, it's me. Because I don't know. I'm just such a huge fan of The Way of Kings being an in-world book and it being like a a group of parables to live your life by. I think that's really cool. So I'm going to read them. Epigraph 1. As I approached the first crossroads, I met a family seeking a new life. Epigraph 2. This family did not speak my language, but we could both write glyphs, which proved facilitative in our conversation. As I shared their kindly cook fire, I learned some of their story, and both are from The Way of Kings' fourth parable. There's not much there, but I'm still very excited about them.
Yeah.
I like that we're getting more of The Way of Kings. I think that means that this set of interludes is probably not going to be very foretelling. Just because Dalinar's read the entire Way of Kings so that such that he knows it by heart. If this was a parable that was relevant, he would have brought it up, I would think.
Mm-hmm.
Which makes me wonder if this will now be relevant for Kaladin, because Kaladin is delving into the Way of Kings for the first time now, right?
True.
Yeah.
There's got to be a reason he has that book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I wonder if we're going to get new parables that are applicable to Kaladin now.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just smiling at the note you put in the notes.
I scrolled down to the new chapter. I literally like shouted. I was very excited. Okay. Day 2. We get Dalinar, Yasna, Navani, Fen, Yanagon, Adolin, Shallan, Zeth, Sigil, Kaladin, Lift, Renarin, Relaine, and Lopin for a total of 14 point of views on day 2.
There goes our theory.
That's not only got to be a record. That's got to be twice a record. Like that is crazy.
Mm-hmm.
I'm reminded of part 5 of Oathbringer, where he just wrote "and the Knights Radiant."
Yes.
All of them.
There's one where he goes like Adolin, Dalinar, and Bridge 4, and there's like 12 different ones. But
I saw that and I was like, well, there goes my theory that we're gonna have only a couple POVs per day.
Yeah.
This felt like a Sanderlanche chapter.
It did.
Just switching POVs.
It did. We start with Dalinar, right? And he gets a frazzled Windrunner running up to him, giving him some news. Which, okay, at the beginning of the chapter, I assumed I knew what that news was. But then in the Navani portion, Navani's like, you really shouldn't spy on the people in the tower. And then the sibling says, oh, you should really hear what this Windrunner's saying. So I think Navani's going to be fine with spying people on the tower from now on. But I assumed we knew what this Windrunner was about to say. Is this Windrunner about to drop like more news that we don't know?
No,
I
don't
think
so.
This is the Windrunner that Adolin and Shallan sent to him to like wake everybody up and say, hey, there's an attack on, is it Azir?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is the one they knew about. Yeah. Is it Azir or
they say Azir in the audiobook, but
that's how I've always said it in my head, but I've been wrong plenty of times.
Oh, I'm just completely remembering what it's called. Yeah. Azimir is how I'd say it if I didn't hear the audiobook.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But how are they saying? It doesn't matter. Don't we hear it? Oh, we hear the messenger telling Wit and Yasna, and it is about Azimir.
Right. So yeah, I assume it's the news that we already knew from yesterday.
Yeah.
But I don't know. It seemed to be more exciting to the sibling than Azir's under attack. That didn't. I mean, obviously that's news for them, but
yeah, that's true. Because the sibling has never really cared that much. So the fact that the sibling cares.
I think this is literally just a way that a messenger would not be able to find Navani. So it's a way for Navani to get the news.
Right.
So that she's at the meeting.
Right.
I really think it's just that. And then a little bit of tidbit of like, we get in her head a little bit and we learn about more about the tower and her relationship with the sibling.
Yeah, the little bit we got for Navani, I thought was really interesting, and just not like as a mechanics standpoint, but as like a writing decision that Navani no longer needs to sleep, like canonically can live off tower light, and B is confined to the tower with exception to like short vacations.
I think that's relevant. Do you remember we were talking about Ba'auda Mishram's capture, and there was Malishi.
Yeah.
Didn't we decide Malishi was a bonded to the sibling?
Yes.
So Malishi left the tower to do that, presumably. So that was that immediately like interested me in that, like, okay, so Malishi was willing to leave the tower and diminish his powers by doing so and risking the bond in order
Right.
to do this. So it adds kind of more weight to what Malishi did.
I wonder if the Radiants had abandoned the tower before that or after that.
If there was a sibling bondsmith, they would be in the tower.
Do we know if Malishi made it out alive from that exchange?
I don't know.
I assume we don't know, but
I don't know.
yeah,
I don't know.
I don't know either.
We don't know that much about Malishi. I think we're going to learn a whole lot more in this book.
But I wonder. Just my thought was when the Radiants began to decline and eventually left the tower, all those like glass journal things we got from or stone or whatever they were, gemstone journal entries we got in Oathbringer. I wonder if that was after Malishi did this or before, or if Malishi, by the time he unbonded the sibling, was kind of just hanging out near Theru alone or something.
I have a hard time putting events in order, but logically, in my head, it had to be that they trapped Ba'auda Mishram first, and then the Recreants happened, because otherwise they would have just lost the war, right? While there was a war going on, they needed the Radiants to be fighting. But then now there's no war, and they found out that their powers are dangerous and all this other stuff. They're like, okay, we're done. We don't need Radiants anymore. The war's over. Ba'auda Mishram's trapped. There's going to be no more desolations, as they believed. So why don't we just stop?
And from my understanding as well, the trapping of Ba'auda Mishram was fairly political. Like, that caused schisms between, like, we really shouldn't do this to the singers, or this is worth the cost. Oh, now that we've done it and enslaved all of the singers, like, I can't be a Knight Radiant anymore. This is not with my values. That's kind of how I thought it happened.
I will say, though, that there is text in some of those gemstones that say that there are plans to trap Ba'auda Mishram.
Right.
So, but that doesn't mean that all of those gemstones were recorded after they decided to leave the tower. Like, I think their last thoughts are recorded there, but they probably had this system of recording stuff for a long time before that, and they were using it for important records that can't be lost.
I'm with you there.
And it makes me rethink the Feverstone Keep vision. Like, what convinced the Radiants to leave there? Was it that all of a sudden they just went like their enemies just went blank and they're horrified by it? You know, what was the cause of them leaving to go do that at that point?
My understanding is that perhaps that particular vision especially is a metaphor.
So that one, it's two orders of Knight Radiants specifically. There's Windrunners, obviously, and then there's like Stone Lords with them or something like that. And I take that as they were declining for a while, but this was like a key step of, we're no longer doing this. I'm laying down my sword. Maybe they were ordered, like, because the vision goes that there were a bunch of regular soldiers in the keep, and there were Knights Radiant off in the distance, like that were at a battlefront, and then they had retreated. So they were fighting someone, the Knights Radiant, and then retreated and abandoned their shards. So I'm wondering if they were given orders that they no longer could abide by as a Knight Radiant. Go slaughter singers as they're unbonded to Mishram or whatever. Like they're just sitting there idle, and they wouldn't do that.
I think this actually gives evidence to what I had said before, because the two orders you really need in battle are the Stone Wards and the Windrunners.
Right.
So if you recall, Syl was the only honor spren to survive the Recreants.
Right.
The only one, which means every single honor spren had a Radiant at the time of the Recreants, except for Syl. Syl had just lost her Radiant and was mourning him.
Right.
So I think it could be that, the Windrunners and the Stone Wards said, we're going to stay until the fighting's done, but then we're done. Like they had already kind of decided we're done with this, but we're not going to abandon the world.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So then Bottom Mishram's captured. There is no war anymore. And they all just make a display of okay, we're done now. And then they killed all their spren by accident because Bottom Mishram was captured. So I think this lines up really well with what I had said earlier. That was really good, Trevor.
I'm on track with you. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it really fits with the way Sanderson likes to tell stories. He gives you information and then adds context and then adds more context. And it just broadens the meaning of everything.
It makes me wonder when the Edge Dancers abandoned their oaths, because they are also used in battle.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
A lot of the other ones, they could have just been well, I'm done, before even. So the question is, are there spren that survive the Recreants, other than Skybreakers? Are there a couple cryptics? Are there some, random whatever other spren? Or was it literally everyone but Syl?
Yeah, I would lean towards there's others that survived. They just are hanging out in Shadesmar being disgruntled.
Yeah.
Get off my lawn.
Yeah, exactly.
It would be fun to meet some of them though.
Yeah. Though I would definitely have the question of did you not know that dead eyes weren't a thing before but they were now? Why did you let everyone believe that it was because of, I don't know. I've got a lot of questions there, but maybe we'll get answers.
Good
I do
questions.
want to talk about about Yasna. And she's got a line where she's talking about how Dalinar he chose himself to be the champion, and she's wondering, is this something I should have done? If I was more honest about my abilities, would I be doing this? And she doesn't like the lack of control that she has. But the way she words it, it almost makes it sound like even now she hasn't told people everything that she can do. What do you guys think of that?
I think that is definitely true. And she also has a line saying, I'm okay with secrets, not lies, when she's pondering her relationship with Hoyd.
Mhm.
So she has her secrets and she just holds on to them tightly. And she's thinking if I didn't have so many secrets, would things have worked out better? But I find it interesting because I've always found lying through omission to just be another form of lying, but she doesn't seem to agree with me there. I think that's interesting. I wonder if that's something that she's going to have to reconcile with herself, because up till now, Yasna has been painted as this perfect person. And I think she has all kinds of flaws that we just haven't learned about yet. And she's going to have to overcome those.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously from this chapter, we get direct reference to early teen trauma or late childhood trauma that she clearly experienced and vividly remembers. hasn't forgot about it like Shallan has. She's held on to it as her identity, even though everyone else seems to have forgotten about it conveniently or whatever. Like that's directly in the book here. I'm wondering if through that trauma she learned incorrectly to hold all of her secrets. Don't tell everyone what I can do because they will punish me for it. So she just doesn't share anything anymore.
Isn't that it? I feel like that parallels Kaladin in Words of Radiance in Way of Kings, where he's like, if I reveal who I am, they'll take it from me, because they've just consistently done that in the past. And Yasna's like, I'm not going back into a cage.
Right.
And
anything she has shared with Shallan's been the one to pull it out of Yasna, like either intentionally or unintentionally. She'll either confront her about this, run into Shadesmar and make Yasna chase her, and then make her explain what's going on. Anything that Yasna has given up has either been by necessity or like by her obvious intelligence. So yeah, obviously there's a lot more for Yasna that we don't know about. We've seen Ivory like 3 scenes total so far. That's very intentional. We have no idea what Elf Scholars can do.
We have no idea what her oaths are, or even like what Elf Scholars do for oaths. There are no other Elf Scholars. She's not mentoring any. There's something going on there. There's another little bit that I want to talk about, kind of related, which is her paranoia, right? She has all these alarms and everything. There's a little bit that was like, this at first to me felt like a kind of mistake in writing. And then I realized, wait, no, it's not. When she gets that, when I think Hoyd was startled or something, anyway, she gets startled awake or whatever it is. And she reaches, she's like, if I need to reveal the spheres so I can suck in the Stormlight. And if I do that, though, they'll know I'm here. And she's thinking all that. She can use Tower Light. She has infinite Tower Light. So why does she immediately go, I need a bunch of Stormlight spheres near me? And I think that's paranoia, where she's like, I'm not going to get caught without my abilities. I'm not going to depend on others. I'm not going to depend on Navani providing the Tower Light.
Right.
Whereas all the other Radiants, like, why would they carry Stormlight around Urithiru?
They'll get lax on their Stormlight now.
Yeah.
Whereas Yasna's been stabbed through the chest and only saved her life because she had Stormlight on her.
Stitched into her clothing.
Yeah.
There's definitely a lot of paranoia. And it served her well, but also I think that might be another part of kind of her flaws or things she might need to overcome and learn from. I think it's paranoia to the point of being detrimental to her mental health.
Right. Which we probably won't get to learn about till book 7 or whichever book hers is.
I love anytime I see there's a Yasna POV, because I love learning more about her, and I know that we're not going to get a lot until back half, but still. Isn't it book 10 or something?
No, I think book 10 is one of our heralds.
Okay.
And I think
Talonel.
Yeah, I think Talon was 10 and Yasna's in the middle there somewhere. I don't remember.
That can change, of course. He changed his plans for the first 5.
So. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay. I just want to point this out. We've had our fair share of awkward scenes in our preview chapters so far. But in this one chapter, we had, what was it first? Wit and Yasna in an intimate setting. Like, it wasn't explicitly like, nudity or anything like that. But the next scene is Queen Fen in a quite intimate setting. And then the next scene is Shallan and Aelin in a rather intimate setting. So I was like, okay, 1 is a coincidence. I mean, well, 1 is, weird. 2 is a coincidence. 3, what's going on here? Why do we 3 like intimate scenes back to back between these random heroes all across Roshar. They're just all having intimate scenes all at the same time.
Maybe it's the calm before the storm.
Yeah.
I'm surprised, honestly, that Dalinar and Navani weren't also in an intimate scene.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Although she was spying on him. But anyway, I think Calm Before the Storm, I think that it also is related to how he wrote this chapter, because they all start with so-and-so was not asleep. And there's a lot of parallels between the different POVs in this chapter. I think he's trying to do something like poetic there, like having kind of a reflection across all of these. They, it all starts out the same. They can't sleep. Yanagon's was funny, where he's like, I'm definitely asleep because I'm supposed to be contractually. So therefore I am. But yeah, that was pretty funny. But anyway, it all starts with them not being able to sleep, and then having some kind of intimate-ish moment. It's not, so you could argue some of them didn't, and then finishing with learning the news.
Right.
So
and
yeah,
I think what Tim was saying was correct. That I think what Brandon Sanderson's really trying to highlight is these are still normal people, like pursuing their trying to pursue their normal lives. Like Dalinar has Gavinor run up to him and say, we were going to do sword practice, and like, oh, we'll do it tomorrow, I promise, blah, blah, blah. Like, the world is ending, but you're still experiencing it with your loved ones and doing what you do with your loved ones. Like, he's just trying to highlight that life as normal is progressing, even though the world is ending.
All I can think of is the quote, "Life finds a way."
Yeah, exactly.
I want to talk about what you just brought up of Gavinor making an appearance here.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
He's having nightmares. Did you catch that?
I did.
Yeah.
Paladin was having nightmares in Rhythm of War.
Given by Odium, right?
Given by Odium, so that he would become Odium's champion. Or kill himself. So I think this relates to the theory that Gavinor might be Odium's champion. You promised we would play swords or whatever.
And then
he's having nightmares.
Oh no.
Why would Gavinor make an appearance if he's not important? Like, it's Chekhov's gun again.
Right. We just talked about this. Yeah.
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 I've never given much credence to that before, but it seems like some things are falling in place.
I think so too. Gavinor feels ignored. He wants to prove himself to Dalinar. He in the last book, didn't he want to like go off and get revenge for his father's death?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Like he's a child, but he has these passions, right? And I picked that word on purpose, but
right.
And now he's having nightmares. The real question is, can Odium reach into your Theru to give Gavinor nightmares? Because he couldn't even reach Moash. So that's one thing I'm a little bit like, I'm not sure, but still it feels
possibly
like
because of Queen Aesudan's messing with him, or at least allowing the evil Spren to mess with Gavinor.
Right.
I could see that being something with that.
That was set up all the way in Oathbringer, yeah, where he was being surrounded by Void Spren.
Yep.
They were playing with him.
As a 2-year-old, yep.
Yeah. So he could have a pretty deep connection to Odium.
Yeah, that
I'm concerned.
that brings me back to Interlude 2, which, as an aside, the picture for Interlude 2, it's hilarious. You should look it up. There's like this crown on this super old face, or maybe it's an owl. I can't tell, holding a sword.
Oh
really
yeah, it's like he's upside down, so like that's the duality.
Mm.
Yeah.
It's like
Yeah.
Yeah.
like the King of Spades type thing where they're mirrored on both sides.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a really interesting art. I did notice that. Thanks for pointing it out.
Yeah, you're welcome. But
Cool.
it's connected with this first line: Odium knelt holding a dying child, which brings back this quote from, it might be the Way of Kings.
It's a
I
death
hold
rattle.
this, a death rattle. Okay. I hold the suckling child in my hands, a knife at his throat, and know that all who live wish me to let the blade slip, spill its blood upon the ground over my hands, and with it gain us further breath to draw. Now, like, Gavinor is a little beyond that stage, uh, but it definitely has some similarities there.
Yeah.
If that quote is from Dalinar's point of view, he could still consider Gavinor to be like a suckling child. Like
Mhm.
he doesn't really treat Gavinor as a person. He thinks of Gavinor still as like a baby to be protected. I mean, Gavinor is still very, very young, but
Right.
like he talks and he has desires that aren't being met.
Mhm.
So if this is Dalinar's POV, like that was the one thing that I've always been like, maybe not Gavinor because of the suckling child thing, but
Yeah.
you could twist it to fit.
Yeah.
And the whole thing with Todium in the epilogue, it was the epilogue, right, of Rhythm of War, where he's like, I think I found a way around this, like to get
Yeah.
out of the contest.
Yeah, I guess we didn't really talk about that. In this chapter, we get Hoyd running over to the contract. I didn't talk about this because I've already talked about this on the podcast once, but he runs over and checks his breaths or whatever he's doing, and I'm missing 3 minutes and 22 seconds or whatever.
The amount of investiture that man has.
And then go ahead.
What was he doing? So he isn't light weaving himself. He's using some Yolan magic maybe to actually transform himself. And that's reminiscent of what Returned can do.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it might be a similar, I'm not saying he's a Returned. That is not
Yeah.
my theory. But it might be a similar mechanic.
He did say,
Where-
oh, go ahead.
We know that mechanic, it also is in Yumi. That mechanic is you have a kind of identity and self-image, and then your body conforms to that. Your physical body conforms to your soul's self-image. And that's how healing works too.
Right.
And so what if he's able to lie about himself, like lie to his self-image, transform his self-image in some way?
It could even be as simple as a Night Radiant ability where, Knights Radiant heal themselves like their arms or whatever, and if they perceive themselves as unhandicapped, then they're not or whatever. So I could write it off as easily as being a light weaving power, not like that he's light weaving himself, but as he's morphing his body because he's got 27,000 BEUs or whatever. So yeah, I don't know. I'd be open to whatever.
Yeah, that's a good point. I thought it was a breath ability because he was talking about how breath, you get a certain amount and it expands your soul, which I'm assuming that's the point where you can like change your appearance.
It could just be, having that divine breath, which is is it Egly's splinter of Egly? She splinters herself, gives the divine breath to Returned. And the reason Returned can then change shape is potentially, Vasher can do it too. He can decide to look like something else other than his true form. So I think it's just something Hoyd learned to do with breath. I think that's probably true.
It is interesting that he runs through all of his magic there. Like, does he do that to measure what's there, or just to test that it's still there? What do you think?
I wish I knew. Here's what I thought while he was doing it. I thought he was accounting for all of his BEUs, like literally just like tallying his BEUs, like writing it out. and calculating it and being like, oh, I'm missing 1 BEU. So one of my breaths was destroyed. But no, he comes back and says, I'm missing 3 minutes or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
which is a lot different.
Yeah. I think there's some sort of like auto record mechanic that's going on where he tells Yasna, my brain physically cannot handle how much I've lived. So I store it in breaths. But for him to have such a recent occurrence having to be stored in breaths, and it's not like an active thing he does, it's a passive thing he does. I don't know. That's odd.
Well, he says it expands your soul. So he's literally augmenting his sense of self with breath. So maybe that's related. I don't know. There's definitely some wishy-washy mechanics happening there. And I'm also surprised that he wouldn't have recent memories in his physical form.
Right,
Mhm.
right.
But I mean, like, if you think about it, cognitive shadows have all of their memories. And there is no physical brain to store a cognitive shadow's memories into. So maybe in the Cosmere, your actual consciousness and memories are stored within your spirit web in some way and not actually in your brain.
Could be. Do you guys want to talk about Keen Spren and Life Spren at all?
Yeah, what'd you have?
So Keen Spren, I was curious about what they were. So I looked it up on the Coppermind. We don't have much about them, but in this chapter we see there's like a rainbow light with it, and then somewhere, whether it was in the Coppermind or in the chapter, it's mentioned that Keen Spren are a radiant Spren. So I was very curious why the sibling is talking about how Keen Spren don't want to be captured by humans. And like how that is related.
Do you remember half shards? I think Teravangian was researching it. I always suspected half shards were captured on our Spren.
Hmm.
So obviously the radiant Spren don't want to get captured into gemstones.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think any Spren wants to, but like in terms of being able to want, it's
Yeah.
the
Right.
radiant Spren who can.
Right.
They're less animalistic, right? So
Yeah.
do you know which radiant order the Keen Spren are? For?
I didn't see it being connected to anyone as far as we know.
I'm gonna put money that it's the armor spren of Will Shapers.
Oh, which one has not been clarified? Wendell considers growing a garden for Keen Spren to be a comparison point for weirdness. So yeah, we don't know which Radiant Spren they are, but I don't think then that would be an Armor Spren.
Yeah.
Yeah, we should be seeing hints of what kind of Spren Navani attracts, although she seems to attract all Spren.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have evidence yet that bondsmiths get armor. I think it would be neat because I think Dalinar is a beast in in armor. Imagine what he would do with living armor, but there's no evidence they get it at all.
I think they do. Doesn't the Stormfather and Dalinar discuss it at one point where Dalinar asks, or the Stormfather specifically says you won't get a blade, and Dalinar asks about armor, and it's not a yes or no answer. It's a you'll get there when you get there type thing. So it's a toss up of whether they do or not.
I could see her armor being like an armor of many colors. She attracts all the Spren.
That'd be cool.
So maybe, yeah. Like we were talking earlier, why are Spren just attracted to her first? They just love her. Like the armor Spren, like love their being around their radiant. Like we saw that with Shallan. So eager to please. So maybe Navani could make armor out of literally any Spren she wants.
That would be really cool.
Yeah.
I was off of this chapter, I was thinking maybe Life Spren were it because she and the sibling together are like making life viable there. But you're right. All the Spren have been attracted to her.
I think that was. I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just sort of augmenting this. That it felt like a callback to how the listeners would grow crops, where they would attract lifespread to help their crops grow. And so I think that
yeah.
mechanic is being used by the tower to grow where normally you can't. Because they were
Yeah.
trying. That's how they were producing food at Urithiru before Navani bonded the sibling. Is they would play the drums and all that and attract the lifespread. Like they were just constantly doing that 24/7.
Mhm.
It sounds miserable, to be honest.
I think the tower was generally miserable. So
Yeah.
there are worse jobs, like being sanitation.
Fair.
Anything else?
There's a note from Tim. There are a couple notes from Tim that we haven't covered. Did you want to cover those, or?
Yeah, and this one's the most important. So if Navani doesn't need sleep because the sibling doesn't sleep, why does Dalinar need sleep?
Yeah. I just as a general thing, I am really liking that the bondsmiths are completely different. At the end of Rhythm of War, I wasn't like super excited that Navani was the new bondsmith, whatever. Like we've gone down this path before. Clearly, no, we have not, because Navani is doing something completely different to Dalinar. I think that's really cool. Why does Dalinar have to sleep and Navani doesn't? I have no idea. I was going to talk about this earlier. I think this is a really odd choice from Brandon to make one Knight Radiant specifically not have to sleep and then is bound to the tower physically. That seems really odd choice.
I didn't find it odd. I think it makes sense to me because she keeps the tower running.
Right.
It would, if she was asleep, she wouldn't be able to actively keep the tower running. And it wasn't until she bonded the sibling that the tower could run. So I don't think the sibling can do it on their own. I think it's the combination of the Radiant and the sibling that causes the tower to function. And if she were asleep, 8 hours a day, the tower would be dormant for 8 hours a day, which wouldn't be good. So I feel like almost this is a way, like Sanderson was like, I need to explain how the tower keeps functioning while Navani sleeps. What if she just doesn't have to sleep, and then just throws that in there? I could see him doing that. But it also means she's always vigilant, which she has that vigilance property for Magic the Gathering, right? She's a wall. She can't attack. Anyway.
Yeah, I took it more of she's a scholar, and so this is a way of giving her unlimited time, basically, to research and find more things.
That's true. Assuming she lives, which is a decently big assumption at this point.
She's the safest of anyone, I think.
Yeah, I also kind of wanted to talk about that, but I'll put a pin in that. For our 20 or 30 years, whatever it is, between 5 and 6, whatever progression we're going to get on Roshar is all going to be through her. So, if she's literally 24/7 looking through books and experimenting and playing with stuff in the tower, there you go. There's 200 years of technology that you can explain. But in our previous chapter, an heir or whatever it was called, where Kaladin gets the cloak, blah, blah, blah. Dalinar specifically says, if I and Navani die, you're in charge of the tower, which made me think that the odds of Navani dying went up since that chapter. Now, with these interludes and chapters here, Knights Radiant are basically impervious as long as, is that the right word, in the tower. And now Navani's never leaving the tower. So I was like, okay, so is Navani safe? Like, the sibling seems to think so, that even back then they hardly ever invaded the tower. So I'm really curious where that air thing now goes if Navani is safe.
I will say you don't introduce the mechanic of she can't leave the tower unless she leaves the tower.
Okay, that's fair.
Mm-hmm.
So there's going to be some plot line where she has to leave the tower, decides to leave the tower, and then she's vulnerable.
Yeah, and if Dalinar becomes Odium's general and isn't allowed back on Roshar for whatever reason, are they just going to spend eternity separate? Is she willing to go with the cost of that, all that kind of stuff?
And we've already had it described to us, the mechanics of this. It's literally like 200 yards outside the tower and you're cut off. So
Mm-hmm.
it wouldn't have to be far that Navani, she could drop off the tower and die.
Well,
That would-
it sounded like she could leave the tower and still be a bondsmith.
Oh, you're right. It was like a couple weeks time frame. You're
Yeah,
right.
it was a time
Never
frame
mind.
of a couple weeks. So I don't know how that works. She also literally brought up, we need to find a way to let them keep the tower light.
Yeah,
Mhm.
She's working on it. So it could be a combination of that. Like she's figured out how to transport tower light, make it last longer. Plus, she has some reason that she needs to leave the tower. She utilizes that in order to leave the tower and then, makes herself vulnerable, sacrifices herself or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
So that could definitely happen. But while she's in the tower, I feel like she is extremely safe. But
Yeah, definitely.
I liked the description of like they can't send in the fused because they'll just pass out. So they'd have to they can't even send in the what are they called? The
Regals?
Regals, yeah. And so they'd have to send in normal troops and they would be absolutely slaughtered by the Radiants. Like
that is
it
the
would-
quote. I was like,
Yeah.
wow, okay, we're not stepping on,
Yeah.
we're not tiptoeing around here. We're just saying they'll get slaughtered.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, how many Radiants that with infinite tower light and normal troops with no magic at all? Like maybe they could send in people who have other magic systems. Maybe that's what's waiting.
Yeah.
Like maybe
Skybreakers.
Sanderson has tried to impress on us a little bit too much that the tower is very safe and won't be invaded again. But also, do we really want to see the tower get invaded again? I almost feel like it's a promise from him. We're not going to revisit Rhythm of War. Don't worry.
Yeah.
Die Hard happened once. We aren't having a Die Hard 2,
Yeah. So there were two more things I wanted to get into. One, it's a bit of a throwaway comment. Dalinar is talking about his bodyguard, Kolot. Not sure if I'm saying that one quite right. But that guy, he was actually a Windrunner squire in Oathbringer when everyone's trying out for the Windrunners. He was the light-eyed guy who joined. And there's a statement about Dalinar wanting to make sure he doesn't feel rejected again. So I'm curious if we're going to learn more about that, what happened. It's not a big thing, but it's a one of those small things that I wouldn't have caught. Like it seemed suspicious, so I looked it up. I didn't quite remember all the details. But what I really want to get into is the three that we know of invasions. It makes sense. We talked about it that there are multiple invasion forces going. But was all this planned by Race when he was Odium, or do you think some of this is thrown together by by Todium intervention?
I wanted to just add to this that we did get a brief mention that they know they lost Cultivation's perpendicularity.
Yeah.
So
Or at least Hoy
something
does.
happened to the Horneater Peaks. It was invaded. That whole thing we were talking about probably happened. And maybe that's what Horneater's about, or at least is adjacent to. But yeah, I don't know who planned this. My initial thought, if you remember back to when we talked about it before, I was like, I think this was planned by Rays because of the timeline. How much time has happened since Taravangian ascended. It's only like a few days, right?
Yeah, literally a day. Yeah.
Like there's no way he had time. This has to have been Ray's already planning this. And Ray's is like he isn't new to sneak attacks. So like he did several sneak attacks in Oathbringer and Rhythm of War.
Mhm.
Like literally the Rhythm of War was a sneak attack on the tower. So and Oathbringer there was a sneak attack on Thalen City, right?
Yeah.
And the tower.
And the tower. Like he loves sneak attacks. It's the only way he does it. So I think it was Ray's, but
What do you think,
Yeah.
Trevor?
I'm with David. The timeline, unless there's something really odd going on with Taravangian, it has to be Ray's and his plan, and just the continuation of Ray's plan. And it could even be, as I was thinking about this as you were talking there, David, it could be Ray's plan, and now Taravangian might be like explicitly against this plan if he's trying to save people in whatever twisted interpretation he has. But I wonder if this plan is in motion and Taravangian maybe not even be for it anymore. He just doesn't want to repeal it and like show his hand to his own fused.
I think he's killing all four, right? All four potential murderers in that parable,
Okay,
right?
sure.
He wants to control as much of Roshar as he possibly can before the contest locks it in. So
Yeah.
I think he's perfectly fine with this. Like he's willing to sacrifice the few for the sake of the many.
Okay.
That's what I think. I don't know. I mean, it would be interesting though. Like your idea is intriguing.
Mhm. Yeah, I think it's him taking advantage of what was already there. Whether or not, do we know, was Race, did he approve or agree to the duel, or was it Taravangian as Odium? Trying to remember how
The
that
Contest of
happened.
Champions?
Yeah, the Contest of Champions.
It was a Ray's contract.
Okay. Well, yeah, that definitely kind of shores it up of he knew what he was doing and he's trying to take it out.
And you could even put in the tower as part of that plan. That, I mean, I think the contest was agreed to back in the end of Oathbringer, was it not?
Yes.
And then the date was set at the end of Rhythm of War. So the seizing the tower could have even been part of this, and it just didn't work out.
He definitely wanted the tower. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that would have won the war right then and there.
Oh, yeah.
If he took the tower.
Right.
He was this close to succeeding too. He basically had the tower.
Darn Navani.
If it weren't for Navani, yeah.
If it weren't for you meddling kids.
Yeah.
And I feel like Moash going off script a bit too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just a little bit. He just had a little bit of deep-seated revenge he had to figure out. Anything else?
I think we covered everything. Did we want to talk about cultivation talking to Dalinar, or did we talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, we can briefly. This is like the last like 2 lines of the chapters we get is, "Hey, Dalinar," and Dalinar turns around and it's like, "No, it's not you, is it?" Apparently, it's cultivation in the tower. I'm really curious if what cultivation's about to say, because there's a lot of people that are led to the theory that cultivation is really behind all of this, setting up Taravangian against Dalinar. Like, she's behind everything. She's the real villain here. I'm really curious about what cultivation's about to tell Dalinar, because if she could come out as our second protagonist of, I'm going to help you against Taravangian because he's going to try to kill me. That's what she could say. Or she could say, Odium is trying to kill us before the contest happens. We need to move against him, or something like that. And she could leave Taravangian completely out of it. So I'm really interested what Cultivation is going to include in this conversation, what she's not, because she could tell him all about Taravangian and Odium, and that completely rocks, Dalinar's mind, as it obviously would. Or she could mention none of that. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot of potential there. I just wonder what her end game is. So if she is the big bad, I've even thought that. Like, she seems like she's very nefarious. But what's the point? What's she going for? I'm not sure.
I think little column A, little column B, I think she's going to pretend, at the very least. Like, I think she's going to come out and be like, I'm helping you. And she's going to give a lot of really useful info. But I think we need to look out for subtle signs of her lying through a mission, or giving slightly incorrect info, or bad advice. Like, we need to look out for that. I think that would be interesting, where it's like, she's helping, but is she only pretending to help in order to continue to manipulate events? She tends... One thing that's interesting is she definitely even just literally had that conversation with Odium of she doesn't interfere very much. She does little pokes and prods to get people growing in the right way. But that's how we've seen her work. So is she really going to just info dump on Dalinar? Or is she going to just do like poke and then leave, right? Feels more Cultivation-esque to just give us more questions than answers and then leave.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
Give him another boon.
Now, whenever you hear Odium's name, you'll just hear shh.
Whenever
it's like, Odium isn't Ray's, he's shh.
He's who? What do you mean? Whenever you see Taravangian, you're going to see Rays instead. Doesn't even make sense. Taravangian's dead. I don't care. This is your boot. Anyway. Anything else?
I think that's it.
I'm ready to call it there.
All right. Let's reconvene with this next week with whatever we get next week. Thanks for joining us, Tim and David.
Thanks for having us.